Welcome everyone to the inaugural, I think you can say, Thomas M. Johnson Symposium. This is the 100th anniversary of his birth. He was known by many people as the sage of the Osage River, not the Native American tribe, but the sage of the Osage. So we're here to celebrate his life and thought. My name is Tom Peters. I'm the Dean of Library Services here at Missouri State University. I want to welcome you to Duane G. Meyer Library. And I'm not a scholar of Thomas M. Johnson. I have been up to Osceola several times, and it's an amazing collection. But I think Thomas M. Johnson would nod in approval if I told you that a lot of people have bucket lists. And my understanding of bucket lists is things you want to do before you die. Let's see, Grand Canyon, you want to do whatever. Well, I took it to one next level. I started a reincarnation list. So these are the things I want to work on if I am ever reincarnated. I hope somehow I have some kind of a document. It might be microfilm, might be who knows what, that would remind me of what my bucket list is if I'm reincarnated. So, just to kind of get us started, a few things related to Thomas M. Johnson and the Johnson Library Museum that I find interesting in a pre-studious way. So I'm not a scholar of these topics, but I find them interesting. One is what I call independent scholarship. And in this late day, where a lot of expertise is centered in places like universities and think tanks, and there's some kind of a corporate, in the broadest sense, sponsorship of scholarship. Let's not forget that a lot of independent scholars did a lot of groundwork that got us to this point. And I think of the Johnson Library Museum as a glimpse into that world of independent scholarship. Now, to be an independent scholar in the 18th, 17th, 19th centuries, whenever, even in the 21st century, you have to have some sort of source of income. But once you have that, you really devote yourself to your scholarly interests, whether it's the genetics of peas or Neoplatonism or whatever happens to be your area of interest. So I think that partly the Johnson Library reminds us of a time when independent scholarship was a major part of scholarship, frankly, worldwide. Okay, the second thing is, I'm not a bibliophile, although I might be in remission or something like that, where, I don't know what I did with my phone, so I've lost myself. People who get interested in books in a big way are sometimes referred to as bibliophiles. And I think there are different strains of bibliophilia. Some people are really interested. I knew a scholar once who was into Horatio Alger books, those kind of, poor boy, does good through hard work kind of books from the early 20th century mainly. And he was like I would call a pure bibliophile because it was all about the objects and getting the books and the rare ones. And it was all about, he had a passing interest in Horatio Alger. But it wasn't really about Horatio Alger and scholarship around Alger. It was about the books, the objects to collect. I do think that we have, and for some people, the name for someone who suffers from bibliomania is the gentle madness. So, it's a bad name, because, an unfortunate name, because you're not mad. It's the gentle madness. You're just really interested in books. I think we have in the Johnson Library Museum an instance of bibliomania. And what I find interesting is most of it's like one generation. Somebody catches it, and then they go on to the great reward, to the reincarnation or whatever, and it's not passed down from one generation to the next. I think in the case of the Johnson, I don't know, this is my reincarnation topic, how many multi-generational libraries like this ever existed, where it was passed down from one generation to the next? I think it's fairly rare to have a multi-generational bibliomania. Thirdly, and I'll be brief, so back in 1904, I believe there was the state, in its wisdom, figured out that it needed more than 3 normal schools for teacher training. Population was growing, we needed more teachers. Now there were private normal schools, today we call them for-profits. There was one in Springfield. But the state was going to add 3 more normal schools around the state, 4, 5, and 6. There was a site selection team that was charged with finding these sites. The chair of the site selection team was the president of Washington University. I've forgotten his name. One of the committee members was Thomas M. Johnson. They came to Springfield. They had 3 sites in Springfield they were going to look at. They went to the first site, which was southwest of town. They were in a buggy. They were going north on what we don't call National Avenue. Back then it was a dirt road. They were going north on National Avenue, and Thomas M. or somebody on the site selection committee said, this spot over here looks kind of interesting. Why don't we stop and take a look at it? It's not on our short list, but it looks interesting. So they stopped. Back in the day, there was a fence was 1 wire, probably on wooden posts. So they kind of got under the wire and walked in about as far as where Carrington Hall is today. And the rest is history. They chose this site. So if you ever wonder, well, what happened? How did this become MSU? This was the site that was selected for the 4th State Normal School, and Thomas M. Johnson was a member of the site selection committee. He was in that buggy that day. Last but not least, I just learned over lunch today, when people write in books, so this is a librarian, I'm a librarian, so I shouldn't write in library books. Don't write in library books, but people do write in books. And the things that you write in books, and you've seen the textbooks that are highlighted in yellow, every other word or every other line is highlighted in yellow. You've seen stuff where people underline important concepts. They might write things in the margin. They might doodle in the margins during the class lecture. Some of you may be doodling right now. I don't know. But that's generally called marginalia. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was such a good writer of marginalia, people would loan him their book, hoping that he would write something interesting in the margins. So there's a whole field called marginalia. We have a marginalia scholar in our midst speaking today. And so that's also on my reincarnation list. So if I am reincarnated, there's many things tangentially related to Thomas M. Johnson. Without further ado, I want to introduce my boss, Dr. Frank Anaheli, who's the provost of the university.
Thank you, Tom. It's my pleasure, actually, to give a second welcome, because you've already been welcomed to the university here. And I know that some of you are from within our own university, and certainly the organizers here, Dr. Putsu, I'm sorry for butchering that at the moment. I want to thank you and working with Tom for the organization you put into that, but also make a few comments about the nature of Missouri State. How many of you are from outside the boundaries of our club? Well, then I'll make it just half as long as my thing, because the other half knows more than I do. But as Dean Peters alluded to, we've been in business for a little over 100 years, about 114 years as a university. And they say of a great university, it has really a stellar past and a vibrant, planned present, and a real energetic look to the future. And I think we have all of those things going. We have a past in which we've educated a number of students that have gone on to populate everything from the teaching profession until, in more recent years, just about every field in the world. And we hit, as a university, 26,000 students last year in our multi-campus system, which involves a 2-year school at West Plains, a campus at Mountain Grove that's a research campus, and a smaller operation in Dalian, China, where we have another campus. So we affect the lives of quite a few students in the process, and most recently we were classified in the Carnegie classification system as a doctoral university as professional doctors. So we continue to progress in the multiple ways that we do affect people in the educational process, and we're kind of proud of that. And of course, Tom's proud of this room that just had a renovation. And so I'm surprised he didn't spend all the time on that, because it just opened up here in a month or so ago as a renovated brand new area. And when I left my office today, though, I said I was going to give a welcome to a topic I knew absolutely nothing about. And they said, don't worry, that's the way you usually do it. And so I said, okay, I guess I can do that. But we'll ask you a question. How does water get to the top of a very tall tree that might be 300 foot tall? Any of you know? Well, I'm glad to see you don't know all about everything too. There's some things you don't know about. This one is particularly important. You know, the logical answers might be, well, it's pumped up. And that's one of the logical ones. But it's not true. As best we understand it, water is pulled to the top of the tree. One molecule hangs on to another molecule by cohesion, and it adheres to the walls of the dead cells that are conducting it, and it's pulled as an evaporation occurs and goes out into the atmosphere, and other molecules pull it along. So it's pulled under tension. That's what we do in education, and that's what we do with knowledge. We actually stand on others' work and add to it and pull others along, I think. And I think that's what you're all about here today. And I guess I always have the philosophy that one of the reasons I'm glad I'm in education now, my earlier time in life was that the labor of the day was very hard physical labor. Now the labor of our society is learning. And beyond that labor of learning, it's the application of knowledge that really gives us a future. And the wealth of a country comes about through what we have in ideas and in knowledge. So as you go through the day, I know you're going to learn a lot more than I am when I go back to do more drudgery things in my necessities of life. I like to stay with you because I already kind of feel a little bit of excitement here. But have a great time. Enjoy the university beyond this room. Enjoy interacting with our faculty that are here, some students that are here. And we welcome you and are really happy to have you on our campus. Those of you that are going outside, and also those of you that are here from the inside. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Reinhellig. A little bit of housekeeping before we get, so we have, we're looking at about 4 hours of presentations, discussions this afternoon. Restrooms are right out here to your right. There's also a little vending area if you get really hungry or thirsty. There's some things out there. And we got some great speakers. My understanding is our next introducer is going to be Tom Johnson. You want to say a few words? So we actually have two members of the Johnson family here today. So Tom Johnson and his daughter Ellie are both here today. Would you like to say any words of welcome about the Johnson Library and Museum of Osceola?
Yeah, we have a library and museum up in Osceola, and every now and then we have fairs up there which we invite everybody to take part in. The next one, actually, we have a lecture scheduled for the evening of Thursday. I believe it's November 21st. At that time, we have a professor from Drury. That's the other school around here somewhere. And he's going to talk to us about the philosophy of the 18th century Enlightenment. And anybody that's interested in that, we'd be pleased to have you come up.
So if you've never been to the Johnson Library Museum, it's just northwest, I would say, from the square, off the square. And it is an amazing place and a wonderful collection of books and other materials, artwork. It's a wonderful place to visit. So most people know Osceola. When you say Osceola, they say one word, cheese. No, we're asking you to add cheese and the Johnson Library Museum. There's two wonderful things, at least two wonderful things in Osceola. As Dr. Angelic alluded to, Professor Vadim Putsu really has done the lion's share of the work in preparing and pulling together this symposium. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Putsu.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the students and thanks for the colleagues who are giving extra credit so that we can actually have the students here. Thanks to friends and family who have decided to just throw their bodies in. It is my honor to introduce the symposium in honor of Thomas Moore Johnson. First of all, institutional thanks. I have to thank, of course, the Johnson Library and Museum, and I thank Thomas Moore Johnson II for being here with us today. MSU Libraries, the College of Humanities and Public Affairs, the Department of Political Science, of English, Religious Studies, Modern Classical Languages, and History for helping to provide for the organization and everything else that is going to happen in the next couple of days. So why are we here today? It is the case that 2019 marks the 100th anniversary from the passing of Thomas Moore Johnson. It is also the case that 2019 marks the 20th anniversary from the establishment of the Johnson Library and Museum as a non-profit organization. It is also the case that 2019 marks the 90th birthday of Thomas Moore Johnson II, Tom Johnson Mayer, and we're very happy to have you here. But why November the 7th? November the 7th happens to be the birthday of Plato, at least according to popular saying. And Thomas Moore Johnson used to organize beginning in 1888 and for 3 years in a row, used to organize a symposium about Plato in Osceola on November the 7th. And here we have one of many letters that are part of the treasure trove that is the Johnson Library, written to Thomas Moore Johnson by Isaac Meyer, a very famous scholar of esotericism in the late 19th century, who basically thanks TMJ, we're going to call him that way for today, please, especially the family forgive us for doing that. But basically, Isaac Meyer Wise thanks TMJ for inviting him to participate in the symposium in Osceola in 1888 on November the 7th, celebrating the then 2317th anniversary from the birth of Plato. Today, we would celebrate the 2448 years from the birth of Plato. So much for the date. As I said, again, Thomas Moore Johnson died in 1919, and local newspapers took notice of that, noticing, for example, that Thomas Moore Johnson was an exponent of Platonic philosophy, and some of our experts today will speak to that, but also the owner of a private library of more than 5,000 volumes. I think this is a very this is an underestimation. At the time that he died, it was closer to 10,000 actually, at least 8,000 if not more. And I'll say a little more about some of those books there. We have some pictures, well, one picture that circulates around the internet about Thomas Moore Johnson, and also a picture of his tombstone, again attesting to his self-identification with Platonism. Just the body has been buried, not his soul. And in case you didn't know, in his own time, Thomas Moore Johnson was hailed as arguably the most important man in Missouri. The then Governor Painter actually rallied for him to be named such in 1915, as can be seen in a number of newspaper clips. So, who was Thomas Moore Johnson? He was one of 4 sons of a United States senator whose family had migrated to Missouri from Virginia in the early 1840s, studied law at the University of Notre Dame, graduated in 1871, and then he passed the bar and served as a prosecuting attorney for 2 terms and maintained a legal practice in Osceola for almost his entire life. He was also interested in civil progress and societal advancement, and he served as the city's mayor, as well as the president of the Board of Education for many years, trying, among other things, to incentivize the study of Latin in public schools. TMJ, however, was neither exactly a globetrotter or a socialite, and I'll say more about that. So once he got back from his college years in Notre Dame, he only moved, took a couple of trips to Texas and Illinois and Massachusetts, but then later in his life he basically didn't leave Osceola unless he was forced. So what that means is that he developed a very, very extensive correspondence. There's a network of people that he communicated with through letters, and that network is absolutely extraordinary. Dean Peters have talked about Osceola and what Osceola is famous for, and if you've been to Osceola, you know it's not exactly the center of the world, to put it fair. But Thomas Moore Johnson was in correspondence with a wide variety of better and lesser known literati of his times, from university professors of philosophy and classics, such as, just to name one, Arthur Lovejoy at Columbia, to scholars of idealism and Neoplatonists, such as Bronson Alcott, to men of letters, prominent one, Henry James Sr. We have a letter that Henry James Sr., the father of Henry James and William James, sent to Johnson up here on display, just outside here. Newspaper editors, journalists, and important politicians. James Greenwood, after whom the Greenwood School is named, Missouri Board of Education, if I recall correctly, was among his correspondents, but also Democratic presidential nominee and future president at the time of their letter exchange, Governor Grover Cleveland. And he had sent a copy of his journal to the governor, then president, in appreciation for his nomination. Johnson was also involved, as we'll hear in a minute, in a number of esoteric organizations, the Theosophical Society, the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, and then a Sufi order, an American Sufi order. As such, he was in touch with prominent members of those organizations, such as General Abner Doubleday, not just a US Army general, but also supposedly the inventor of baseball. I've been told that that's actually not true, but I'm from Italy, I know nothing about baseball, so, you know. One of the founders of the Theosophical Society, Henry Olcott, was also among his correspondents. Many others that we could name. What's perhaps most impressive, however, given Johnson's location, is the international reach of his correspondence, which includes communication with people based, for example, in the United Kingdom. Again, one of the letters that we have on display there comes from England, from London, from the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, a peer of the British Crown, who wrote to Johnson in response to his inquiry for the address of somebody in London, if you can believe that. Scholars, university professors, English affiliates of the Theosophical Society, but also a lot of librarians and archivists. For example, the Vatican archivist and Jesuit Cardinal Franz Erle in Rome, the French governor of Tunisia, René Meyer, and a wealth of other intellectuals in Greece, Hungary, India, Italy, Palestine. Johnson, of course, from his location, was in touch with Midwestern philosophical circles, most notably the St. Louis Philosophical Society that was led by William Harris and devoted mainly to the study of Hegel, and the Plato clubs of Jacksonville and Quincy in western and central Illinois. These were kind of philosophical circles that would be now out of fashion. They were devoted essentially to adult education. And Johnson himself actually started one in Osceola in the late 1870s with school teachers and other professionals. It lasted for a few years, and then it kind of closed down. Johnson was, as we said, definitely a Platonist. And if you need any more attestation to the fact that he was, well, we can just bring up the names that he gave to his sons. Ralph Proclus, Walter Plato, and Franklin Plotinus, which I understand was Tom Johnson's father, correct?
Yes.
And we've already talked about his tombstone. As I mentioned, in addition to the company of people that would exchange letters with him from all over the world, Johnson appreciated maybe more than anything the company of good books. And we've already talked about the number of those good books, but I want to give you an idea of what some of those books are. And then, again, my colleague Natalie Whitaker will say more about some of those books. But much of, from his first acquisitions at age 19, Johnson built a collection of books that would rival most US libraries at the time. Through contacts with both American and European booksellers, he amassed a library of more than 8,000 volumes written in a variety of languages. By 1898, his library had grown so much that it merited its own book house. A 4-room building that became Johnson's private little world in which he would spend most of his days reading, translating, editing, and attending to his correspondence. Much of his collection reflects his interest in Greek philosophy, and it contains close to, I believe, 1,000 volumes by or about Plato, and a wealth of primary and secondary sources related to Neoplatonism. While classical philosophy is extremely well represented in his library, Johnson had also interest for the philosophical writing of the modern period, especially the writings of Spinoza, Berkeley, and Hegel, essentially idealists. On the other hand, Johnson's collection also comprises hundreds of 16th and 17th century publications, many of which we would call today as scholars books about Western esotericism. By that we mean that he had been interested in Hermetic, Kabbalistic writings of Renaissance and Baroque era authors early on. By early early 1870s, he had already secured an impressive, he had already read Marsilio Ficino and Pico and Reuchlin and Henry Moore and more of those scholars. And in due course, he succeeded in securing an impressive number of early printed books about esotericism, astrology, and magic. And I just want to mention two here, maybe three. One is the 1557 edition of Pico della Mirandola's Opera Omnia. And among those ancient and precious volumes, two of the oldest were authored by the Florence Renaissance humanist scholars, Marsilio Ficino. His 1489 De Vita Libri Tres, and the first edition of Ficino's 1492 Latin translation of Plotinus' works. If you can imagine, you can go up to Osceola and find two books that were printed between 1489 and 1492. Johnson was especially proud of the latter, claiming that the publication of this work, that is, Marsilio Ficino's Latin translation of Plotinus, the publication of this work opened to mankind a new intellectual world, just as the discovery of America by Columbus in that same year opened a new physical world. Johnson also worked as a journal editor and published, and he was responsible for 2 out of the 3 journals devoted to Platonism, which were published in the US in the late 19th century. The Platonist, that appeared from 1881 to 1888, and Bibliotheca Platonica, which lasted until 1890. And both journals perhaps didn't have a ton of subscribers, but they had subscribers all over the world, as far as India and Europe. I want to conclude again by saying that part of Johnson's interest with esoteric groups had to do with certain interesting practices, and he was a pioneer in the practice of certain activities here in the United States in the late 19th century. Johnson and his groups were among the first to import, if you will, and use tarot cards in the United States, and we have evidence that he wrote to a British jeweler to have a deck of tarot cards made especially for him. And also one of the first to sponsor the organized practice of yoga in the as early as the 1880s, I believe. As I said, Johnson did not particularly like to travel. He's quoted in a secondary source as saying, I like to be places, I don't like to go places. And to that extent, one of the interesting esoteric practices that he seemed to be interested in was the so-called astral magic or astral travel, whereby you can basically leave your physical body wherever that is and have your soul, your spirit, travel to some other place and meet some other disembodied spirit. I suspect that again, that interest had to do with his reluctance to travel by I guess wagon or train, whatever was available back then. But I want to now conclude my introduction here, and all of these aspects of Johnson's life and work, his love for books and their collections, his love for corresponding with all sorts of kindred spirits all over the world, his involvement with a number of, let's say, new religious circles, and his interest in Platonic philosophy will be addressed by 4 guest speakers that we have been able to invite here today. And I'm I want to say that I'm very proud of the fact that for this symposium, we have been able to bring here to Missouri State the 5 scholars who have written about Thomas Wood Johnson in the past 25 plus years. They're all here. 4 of them are going to speak next, and the 5th one is the one speaking right now.